Hello, so today we are going to do problems from weekly contest 323. The second problem is longest square streak in an array. So let's see what this is. So we get an array of numbers and we have a definition here of square streak, which basically is a subsequence that has these conditions. So the first one is that the length needs to be at least 2. So it's a subsequence, not necessarily then contiguous. So the length is at least 2, and after sorting the subsequence, we want to have each element is the square of the previous one, right? So for example, you could have 2, 4, 16, right? Because 2 squared is 4, 4 squared is 16, right? So that's the idea. And the goal is to return the length of the longest one, the longest square streak that we can find. And if there is none, we want to return -1, right? So that's pretty much it. Yeah, so the only thing here is that the subsequence just is not necessarily contiguous, right? It can be, for example, 4, 16, 2. So that's the idea. Now, how can we solve this? There is actually a pretty straightforward solution. So let me just show how we would do that. So if we sort this array, let's take the first example, right? Let's take this one. So if we sort it in reverse order, right, we would get 16, 8, 4, 6 first, 4, 3, 2. So if we do this, then it's actually pretty easy to do this problem, because we can just, for each number that we've seen, check if its square was already found, right? So for example, when we are at 4, what do we want to do? We want to check if 4 multiplied by 4 already exists, right? And if it does exist, what are we interested in, right? We don't know if this was the last element of the square streak, so maybe there were other elements here, like 16 multiplied by 16, for example. Maybe there was 256 somewhere here, right? We don't know, right? So we want to keep track of what's the streak that ends with this as well, right? So let's call that then the length so far of the streak. That's what I mean. So we can just have a map that exactly contains that value, right? So that for 4, if we find 16 is already in this, right? So what would it have? In this case, it would have length 2, because we have this and we have this, right? Then it would have 16 would have length 2. So what should 4 say? 4 should say 3, right? Because now it has 4, 16, 256. So it should just take the one of 16 plus 1, right? So that's exactly the approach that we can do. So let's run it on this example. So we have this length basically would contain the length so far of square streak, but it's in reverse order, by the way. So the length so far of square streak at key, right? So this would be for some key, right? Okay, so let's run it on this example and just see what we get. So we start out as 16. So when we start at so when we start at 16, let's say it's not we look for 16 by 16, right? It's not there. So we'll just initialize it to 1, because this is the first one, right? And so to do that, we just can have this one initialized to 0, because 0 plus 1, that will give us 1, right? So now 16, it has 1. We go to 8. We check if we have 8 by 8. So what's 8 by 8? Let's just do that here. That's 64. So there is no 64, so 8 is going to be just 1. 6, do we have 6 by 6? No. So 6 is just going to be 1. This would be just, basically, this is just from 0 plus 1, because initially everyone has value 0, right? That's what we'll implement here. Now we take a look at 4. 4 by 4 is 16, so that's there. So we take the length so far, basically, of, let's call this maybe A, array A. So it's just of this multiplied by this, right? Plus 1, right? And since this already exists, which is 16, 1 plus 1, now 4 should have 2, right? Okay. And so we continue traversing. 3. Do we have 3 by 3, which is 9? No. So we add 3 to just 1. We go to 2. Do we have 2 by 2, which is 4? Yes. So we just add 1 into it. So that's 3. Now the best answer, we just take the max of all of the values here, right? Because that's the longest streak, right? And so we just return the max of the values of length so far, right? So that's the main idea. Now, one thing to notice is that we didn't check if the length is at least 2. We need the length to be at least 2. So we can just keep this in a variable and check if because this is the length. If it's less than 2, then we return -1 because this is the max and it's not at least 2, which means there is nothing that is at least 2, so we return -1. So that's pretty much the idea. Okay, so let's code this solution up then and make sure it passes our test cases. So what do we need to do first? We need to define this, what we called here this length so far, right? And we need to sort as well. So length so far is just a collections dictionary, and we want to initialize each of them to 0 just to avoid having to check if it's there or not, because 0 means there is no occurrence, which is what we want. And so to do that, we just use int in Python. And now we also want to sort. Let's call this array A, just easier typing. Now we want to sort it in reverse order. Remember, that's what we did here, because when we look at an element, we want to see if its square is there, and the square is bigger than it. So we want to make sure if we don't sort, then when we look at 4, even though its square is there, it's not in sorted order, right? And so this is reverse equal to true then. So we sort. And now we can just go through the elements in A, right? And we just do exactly what we said here. So the length so far of A is going to be length so far of the square of it. If it exists, then we will add to it, because for example here 4 by 4, 16 exists, so we just add it to 1. If it doesn't exist, it would be 0 because of this initialization, so we'll just set it to 1, which is exactly the right thing, because with one element the length is 1, so this would be +1. Okay, and then we want to just take the max, which is what we said here, so let's just call it mx. So this needs to be values like this. Now we need to handle the case where it's less than 2. So if it's less than 2, then we want to return -1 because there is no solution, there is no square streak, and otherwise we just want to return it. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So let's run this, let's submit. And this passes our test cases. Now in terms of time complexity, this is we are doing O and log n for sorting here. And this one here is just the length of the array, so just O of n. So overall time is O of n log n. In terms of space, we are using this extra dictionary that has length at most n. So we are using O of n space here as well. Yeah. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for this problem. Simple, I think. So please, yeah, like and subscribe, and see you on the next one. Bye.